Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa, Idris with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. We're speaking to contributors and an editor of the soon-to-be launched book, Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope in Malaysia Baharu. Kean, can you tell us very quickly when the book is expected out?
Publisher says before Christmas.
Before Christmas.
So
and all leading bookstores.
For presents.
Yes, of course. and more importantly, in some ways, because of the Australian National University's subsidy of this production of the book, Australia-wide.
Australia. So that's interesting. Is this book meant for an international audience? Because you said you wanted this to be, documenting Malaysian history. It's meant for an international audience.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is with, half of it, whether I looking at, how to explain Malaysia and get away from what sometimes is the cliches.
Okay. So the contributors, very quickly, the contributors I guess wrote this with an international audience in mind, and I think this is interesting because Tashny, you are a correspondent for Foreign Press for South China Morning Post. When you're writing about Malaysia, thinking about an international audience, how do you frame the Malaysian story? What is it that an international community wants to understand about Malaysia?
Honestly, maybe because I've lived here for so long, it's actually...
You're a local correspondent.
Yeah, so that is actually one of the challenges I do have, and there's just so much history you have to distill, especially when it comes to things like race relations or political parties, right? So this guy, for example, deputy prime minister and then opposition leader and then in jail and then in jail again.
Context, right?
Yeah, and it's very difficult to sort of make that accessible to a regional audience. But what we have found is that people are interested. People actually really want to read about Malaysia.
Oh.
And why? What's interesting about the Malaysian story?
Well, beyond the elections, which were landmark and came at a time where everywhere else I would think was shifting sort of to the right, I mean, Southeast Asia is a region that a lot of people are paying attention to. Our sort of outspokenness in things like the Belt and Road Initiative with China has also put us on many sort of maps. Things like Linus, our trade agreements. I mean, again, maybe I'm just too close to the situation, but I think it's a very interesting region
And you managed to persuade your editor of this. I know the South Morning China Post did actually was very focused on doing coverage of the general election,
Yeah.
and in fact, I think was seen as some of the best coverage from the foreign press. It was coming from the South China Morning Post. So yeah, kudos to you. I mean, Kean, this is a very interesting project, and you combine the thick description, the reportage, analytical pieces that are evidence-based, but also speculative pieces. Today, as the new Malaysia is unfolding, what do you think we need to do? I mean, if you had this project, as it were, continue, volume 2, what would you start commissioning? What kind of stories?
I think it would be important that we continue to have serious-minded discussion about a country that we might all feel invested in, and not to be overly cynical and trivial. And that's what ends up happening. People get distracted over, what in Australia might be called brain farts by various people. But, I just don't think people take themselves seriously enough on what is actually a very critical moment. And in a regional context, and certainly in Australia, they see Southeast Asia as, in a sort of way, a buffer between the rising China and the sort of decline or fading out of a Western liberalism. And Southeast Asia is this wonderful melange, of these types of different post-colonial values. And, Malaysia has played a critical role, founding of ASEAN right up till now, where it and Malaysia and Indonesia are really seen as the only two viable democracies in Southeast Asia now.
So just following up on Sharaad's question, I mean, if you're thinking about the second book, I'm still thinking the book is about to be launched, and you said it was it's meant for an international audience. Well, it's for all, but say a local reader is reading it. What is the conversation that you're hoping to spark with this book? You mentioned a bit earlier about this being, about policy development. How would you like Malaysian readers to digest this?
Well, I think it's great that our book, for instance, unlike some other books out there, take Sabah and Sarawak seriously. I think that is a critical issue going forward, and the way that East Malaysia plays, to me, a fundamental role in how we define what a future Malaysia can be. I think that's very important. we tend to, not take that too seriously. There is also the issue, I think, of, religious politics, which is also in there. But also, I think, taking seriously people outside the metropolis, people up and down
outside the Bangsa bubble and
outside the cities. And I think that's something, I think that's what some of the strength of the reportage was, that it wasn't just KL talking to itself.
Tashny, when you speak to your editors and you're kind of pitching stories, what are you looking at? Are the Borneo states, Sabah and Sarawak, important? Are they providing you a real sort of meaty grip on where the country's going?
I mean, Sabah and Sarawak are really important politically. They're kingmakers. They always will be. And I think even now they're sort of capitalizing of this position. But to be, and actually this is exactly what we try to avoid in the book, to be in KL, to be based in KL and not in KK or Miri or Kuching, and there's a huge gap.
Yeah.
You can't report on Sabah Sarawak from KL. That's just the way it is.
You fly there often and to do the stories?
I actually would like to do a 2 or 3 week sort of fact-finding mission at some point.
Mission junket, lovely.
Actually, I would like to ask you that. I mean, beyond reporting for South China Morning Post and the contribution that you have to this book, I'm wondering, what are you hoping Malaysians, the conversations that Malaysians are having and the missing narrative, what are you hoping that people understood or talked more about in Malaysia Baharu?
I've always felt we've got these really great minds like, Hope On, who's in the book, and,
Yes.
and Professor Terence Gomez, and all these really, really brilliant Malaysians who write so well and want these ideas to come out. And I think now there's a bit more, people are a bit more receptive, people are a bit more interested. They want to know a bit more about policy, development, and governance, because it's never been a question
Oh my
before.
gosh, did we make policy sexy again?
I mean, I think what's interesting about the moment that you describe in the ballot run, as it were, is that in moments of crisis, Malaysians come together, use their creativity, there's so much energy, and then there's these long gaps, and it's the in-between where we drop the ball, as it were, right? Where's the energy going into this moment that we saw in that moment? That's my question.
I mean, if I could answer that, I might be the next PM. No, I'm joking. Malaysians are really good at taking things into their own hands when
Needed.
when the need is dire. But there also seems to be sort of laissez-faire attitude to like, all right, we've sorted it out, now it's your turn to fix it, and when you don't, I'll just get disappointed. But I mean, there have been things like the Tanjung Piai by-election, which showed sort of a shift, a swing in voters and things like that. So maybe Malaysians now are a bit more aware or ready or confident about showing that they're pissed off.
There you go. All right, well,
Absolutely.
that's all the time we have on the show today. Thank you so much for being on the show to discuss this book. I'm Melisa, Idris, with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. This is all the time we have for this episode. We'll be back with you same time tomorrow. Signing off for tonight. Thank you for watching.